Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. Welcome to this IAS Educational Fund webinar, presenting key messages from IAS 2025. My name is Kenneth Ngure from Jomo Kenyatta University, Nairobi, Kenya, and I'm the current IAS President-elect. As usual, a few housekeeping rules. Please note that this webinar includes interpretation into Arabic, French, Portuguese, Russian, and Spanish. You can select your preferred language in the bottom bar with the global icon. There are also live captions available. Please keep in mind that they have been generated through artificial intelligence. Please note that due to the high number of attendees, all participants are currently muted. We have planned time after the presentations for a Q&A session. Please send any questions that you may have for our speakers, focusing on today's topic in the Q&A box. If your question is for a specific speaker, please remember to indicate their name when typing your question. You will notice that there is a thumbs up symbol when someone's asked as a question in the Q&A box. If you have a similar question or find the question important, please click on the thumbs up, as this will help us prioritize on these questions. And remember that you can send questions at any time. The recording and the slides of these sessions will be available after this session on the IAS Plus platform. In case you're having any issues with Zoom, you can find additional guidance provided in the chat box. Please also send us any Zoom-related questions you may have there. In the chat box, feel free to also let us know from which country you are connecting from, and I can see a few already are doing that, and what time it is for you. We love seeing some interaction in the chat. Before we move on, I would also like to thank our donors, that is Gilead Sciences and Viv Healthcare. I thank you once again for joining this webinar and look forward to this interaction. I would now want to introduce my co-moderator, Susan Shuba from Zimbabwe, and she is an IAS Governing Council member, a colleague Governing Council member. We are together in the Governing Council. So I will let her take over from here. Welcome, Susan.
Kenneth. Oh, thank you so much, Kenneth. I'm so excited to be with you today. My name is Susan Shumba, as he said, and I'm a Governing Council member for Africa. I'm going to introduce the objectives of the webinar. This webinar will provide participants with key scientific policy, funding, and community highlights from the IAS 2025, the 13th International AIDS Conference on HIV Science. We hope that you gain a clearer understanding of the latest trends and emerging priorities in the global HIV response. I'm also going to introduce today's speakers. We have Alexandra Kaum from Switzerland, Gaston de Risish from Argentina, and Doreen Moracha from Kenya. Thank you all, our wonderful speakers, for being here.
Thank you very much, Susan. It's now my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Alexander Carmen, Head of HIV AIDS Unit, Division of Infectious Diseases at the University Hospitals of Geneva in Switzerland, and IAS Governing Council member. Alexander will be presenting on scientific highlights from the conference. Alexander, the floor is now yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction. So I will first, share my slides. Is this fine?
Looks great, yes.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. So, dear colleagues, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present the highlights of the IAS 2025, which took place in Kigali. I will talk about cure, prevention, antiretroviral strategies, and comorbidities. Then I will highlight the main perspectives from track A to track B in order to cover all thematic areas from basic science, clinical research, epidemiology, track C, to science implementation, track D. Of course, this is a very subjective journey, and I hope it will be generalizable and interesting for this friendly audience. The conference began with a very good news, as the case of Florine Willenberg is remarkable. She has maintained an undetectable viremia for many years without any antiretroviral treatment, and her diagnosis of lung cancer and associated treatments, as you can see on this slide, did not prevent effective viral control in this lady. Mrs. Willenberg belongs to the rare group called elite controllers who provide unique insights into immune strategies for long-term HIV control. But for basic science, I chose to present an abstract highlighting the potential of CAR T cells. Their effector functions can secrete broadly neutralizing antibodies, which reduce viral load in a humanized HIV model, as demonstrated in this study. What did the investigator do? So the investigator have produced these CAR T-cell engineering cells, and they showed that these cells did secrete broadly neutralizing antibodies whose effectiveness enabled elimination of infected cells. So these antibodies were even detectable in the plasma of the mice. Thus, the CAR T-cell demonstrate promise as a path towards functional HIV cure. And I will come back then to the broadly neutralizing antibody. You can see it has been important all along the conference. So let's go now to the vaccine area. And I have some slide, only some slide on this very important topic, because today, aside from cure strategy, vaccines remain a theme not to be neglected in the quest to end HIV. Many unknowns remain in our knowledge needed to reach an effective vaccine. HIV sequence diversity is well known, and you can see that on the slide, but host genetic diversity is also critical, and both must be considered to really design an efficient vaccine. Proof of concept has already been shown that antibody-based vaccine could prevent HIV acquisition. But very interestingly, the administration of broadly neutralizing antibodies to infants could also be an important strategy to prevent vertical transmission, not exactly a vaccine, but still a very important prevention strategy to prevent the transmission of HIV from the mother to the child. So why do we think this is important? That broadly neutralizing antibodies are taking on a growing role in HIV research. And whether in immunotherapy, in cure strategy, or in vaccine development. And this is the reason why I decided to start with all these three domains. But indeed, prevention can be approached in multiple ways. It is multifaceted, and I will now focus on clinical trial of pre-exposure prophylaxis. The Purpose 1 and Purpose 2 studies, well known since Munich last year, presented results in adolescent and young adults. And these slides show the study design differences. Purpose 1 focused mainly on cisgender women, while Purpose 2 included cisgender men, transgender women, transgender men, and non-binary people. And you can see the design on this line, and I will not go deeper into the study design. But what I would like to address with you today is the results. So the results are shown here, and we recall the strong emotion when Purpose 1 results revealed no infection, as you can see here on the left part of the slide, no infection among young women receiving lenacapavir twice yearly. So what is really interesting here is that in both studies, Purpose 1, Purpose 2, in young adults and adolescents, lenacapavir's efficacy and safety was again proven. So why is that important? Is that now we've shown that lenacapavir was efficacious and well tolerated among a broad range of population, including pregnant and lactating women and adolescents and young people. It was well tolerated, and an abstract also showed with a great importance the minimal exposure in breastfed infants. And I put here the reference for this abstract. So These studies led WHO to update its PrEP recommendations, now endorsing lenacapavir for HIV prevention and adjusting testing recommendation for initiation, continuation, and discontinuation of long-acting PrEP. And I really think that this shift is critical. It marks a turning point in HIV prevention and was certainly one of the many highlights of the IAS conference. But it is nonetheless interesting to note that the PrEP pipeline, it is still expanding. We are going beyond the twice yearly lenacapavir. So it is expanding despite the major success of these injectable therapies that I'm just addressing now, the efficacy. A phase 2 study evaluated the safety and pharmacokinetic of a new oral compound referred as the MK8527, given once monthly, only once monthly, orally for 6 months in adults at low level of HIV risk. This slide shows the study design. The randomization was done 2:1 to receive either 2 milligrams, 3 milligrams, 6 milligrams, or 12 milligrams, or placebo, once monthly, orally, for 6 months, from day 1 through to week 20. The study was conducted in Israel, South Africa, and in the US, and the trial enrolled 328 participants with a median age of 28. Notably, more than 30% of participants were women and 30% were enrolled from Africa. The pharmacokinetic of MK8527 were clearly dose proportional, supporting further development of the one-monthly oral PrEP. Phase 3 trials are planned to begin soon. And you can see that the name of the study, Expressive 10 and Expressive 11, are even starting probably next month or so. So finally, regarding PrEP, one cannot ignore the end of the US humanitarian aid support, which enabled over 3.7 million PrEP initiations in the past 5 years. The challenge now it will be to sustain implementation of PrEP despite US funding withdrawal. So I would like now to have some take-home messages on HIV prevention and cure. The broadly neutralizing antibodies featured in both the cure and the prevention sections. In the Purpose 1 and Purpose 2 study, twice yearly subcutaneous lenacapavir was demonstrated to be effective and safe in a broad range of population. Len-PrEP is now included in the new WHO PrEP guidelines. Once monthly oral PrEP is emerging, driving prevention forward by offering individualized options. The impact of budget cuts on the HIV epidemic was shown in one modeling study to be extensive, with community and prevention services being most affected. But finally, the Global Fund and Gilead Sciences announced during the conference an access agreement that will see Gilead supplying doses at no profit for up to 2 million people over the 3 next years. So now comes the question, with all of this, some may ask whether vaccine development is still necessary in the era of highly effective twice-yearly PrEP. And I must emphasize that combining options will very likely be necessary if we really are serious to achieve HIV elimination as a public health threat. But this is the thematic for another conference, because it's a lot to say about this. So I will now go, for the sake of time, and discuss the ART strategies. WHO updated recommendations on treatment, not only on prevention, and in the management of advanced HIV disease. And these were really interesting new recommendations that I would like to present in one slide. So the tenofovir, the first WHO recommends darunavir as the preferred protease inhibitor to be chosen. Second line, tenofovir, TDF, or TAF are considered interchangeable preferred options in both first-line and sequential regimens, introducing the concept of NRTI recycling. In children less than 30 kilo, abacavir is now the preferred option, and WHO also recognized two simplification strategies: DTG-3TC dual therapy and the long-acting injectable cabotegravir and rilpivirine for adults and adolescents with suppressed viral load but with no active HPV infections. And I think these recommendations are extremely important, even where injectables are not yet available everywhere, since WHO guidance is a necessary, through not sufficient, condition to ensure alignment and access to highly effective therapies worldwide. Interestingly, during the conference, the Medicine Patent Pool and Vive Healthcare announced a licensing agreement to allow generic production of CAB-LA for HIV treatment for use in combination with rilpivirine in above 133 countries. And I think this is a really significant step forward to equitable access. However, addressing the financial crisis cannot rely on policy statement alone. London colleague presented a systematic review and meta-analysis on the effectiveness of intermittent oral therapy 4 or 5 days a week, questioning whether this could help reduce costs. This study showed that intermittent regimen, 4 or 5 days out of 7, were comparable to daily treatment in terms of maintaining viral suppression with an HIV RNA below 50 copy, as you can see here in the slide. However, these results were not confirmed in the Breather Plus trial, whose 96 weeks results were also presented in the conference, but unfortunately in a different session. So there were no debate in the session about these two studies. And the key slide of this trial shows the primary endpoint. The non-inferiority margin was not met, and at week 96, in this trial, intermittent therapy was inferior to the continuous therapy. So why is that important? I think that in times of funding constraint, intermittent therapy may be a strategy worth exploring. However, results across different settings and populations may not be directly generalizable. I also choose to present the Impala trial results at week 48, presented by Frona Cresswell's team, which ask whether long-acting injectables could be effective in a different population as the one recommended by WHO, so in people with a suboptimal viral control in resource-limited setting. And what did they show? So first, what we can see here is the study design with the primary endpoint being the viral suppression when comparing CAB-LA and rilpivirine to the continuous triple drug therapy. This was a phase 3b trial, open label, non-inferiority, conducted in 7 sites in Uganda, Kenya, and South Africa. And before starting the long-acting, people were ongoing in a screening phase where they were enrolled then in the long-acting randomized part of the trial if the viral load was below 200 copies for the last 3 months. So this slide showed the primary endpoint of this trial. What they showed is that the cabotegravir and rilpivirine injections were non-inferior to daily oral therapy, even in patients whose viral load was uncontrolled at baseline or when patients entered the trial. And I think this is really important that we could demonstrate the non-inferiority of these long-acting drugs, because right now they are part of the WHO guidelines only for the drug simplification. So why is that important? Because long-acting ART injectable is now effective in individuals with suboptimal viral control across high, middle, and low-income countries. So let's go now to the comorbidities. The comorbidities, maybe the highlight, and I'm sorry for this conflict of interest from my side, was the Unity trial presenting the tecovirimat for Mpox, and the primary clinical outcome results from the randomized part of the Unity trial were presented during the conference. So the objective of the trial was to assess the time from randomization, was to assess the resolution to all lesions from randomization to the end of the trial. It's a phase 3 trial that was conducted in Argentina, Brazil, and Switzerland. So you can see here the study design. The randomization was 1-to-1, tecovirimat 14 days in the randomized part versus placebo. And then we had an open label arm that was not analyzed and results were not presented during this conference. So what did we show in the Unity trial? Among the 500 patients that were included, with a median age of 34 years, 95% identifying as MSM and about 2/3 were non-white, most of the participants were enrolled in Brazil. We show the results here on the right, and you can realize that there was the time to complete lesion resolution didn't differ across the study arms. So tecovirimat versus placebo, there was no difference in the time to complete lesion resolution in this trial. So the conclusion was that Unity findings do contribute to the growing body of evidence that tecovirimat is safe but not efficacious in leading to faster resolution of mpox lesion, even in a population with a higher prevalence of HIV co-infection. And this is really consistent with the results that we know already from STOMP on clade 2 and with SPAN 007 from clade 1. So I would like now to have 2 slides because I couldn't show all the study design and results, but there are some studies that I just wanted to give you a flavor of. The first one is a new maturation inhibitor developed in India that was a proof of concept study and showed a significant reduction in HIV-1 RNA level versus placebo over a 14-day monotherapy period. So maybe we will have to remind ourselves about the HFR 171 molecules. Another very interesting abstract was the pregnancy observatoire that showed on 42 pregnancies with scab exposure that were reported. Most were preconception exposure, and 35 live births were reported with only 1 birth defect. And also a phase 2 study of switching to once weekly islatravir, ulonivirine, versus continuing bictegravir, FTC, and TAF that support further development of this combination, but with a lower islatravir dose. Finally, 2 other study shorts, a question that we ask ourselves a lot of time, the DO-IT trial. So in people with obesity, do we have an efficacy if we switch the treatment to a doravirine and tenofovir-based regimen? And in this trial, we didn't see any difference, unfortunately. And finally, in the TCANE study, the use of trichloroacetic acid for treatment of AIN in people with HIV provided comparable efficacy to the standard of care electrocautery. So I think it's also interesting to have this kind of presentations in randomized clinical trials. So finally, what are the conclusion and the take-home messages? And this is really a very, very short summary. But first, from the track A, the HIV reservoir is complex, but there is a roadmap for the development of cure intervention. And in this roadmap, immunotherapy and broadly neutralizing antibodies are part of this roadmap. We do think that HIV vaccines are necessary because vaccines have a broader and more lasting impact, reaching diverse populations as compared to the twice-yearly lenacapavir. HIV viral biology is being elucidated, and a better understanding of HIV virology enables new approaches, such as the CAR T-cell, such as the enhanced BNAbs in development. And finally, for the track A, the challenges are substantial, but our knowledge and toolkits are expanding, and the future holds opportunities for the global scientific community to seize. For the track B, I think it was a very, very rich track B with relevant studies that have been presented. And some of the newer strategies have now been incorporated into guidelines, such as the WHO's recommendation of long-acting cabotegravir and rilpivirine for suppressed individuals, or DTG-3TC for treatment simplifications. So although funding constraints have been a recurring theme throughout the conference, the key message we must take away is that we certainly won't go back. In the Track C report, the political commitment through sustained funding, alignment with PrEP preference, and the elimination of stigma and discrimination are key to driving PrEP uptake and advancing HIV prevention. And finally, the Track D general context conclusion said that we should address social determinants of health that is essential in HIV management because they directly impact individuals at risk of infection, access to service, and treatment outcome. And with this, I would like to thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Alexandra, for such a wonderful presentation. I would like to introduce the next speaker of the day. Our next presenter is Gaston Devsish, Community Engagement Representative at the Research Department of Fundación USPED in Argentina. Gaston will be presenting on the policy, funding, and equity updates. Gaston, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Susan. Let me just get the slides ready and we will be in our way. Well, good morning, afternoon, evening to everyone as applicable. I'm very grateful to be here to share the key highlights from the conference focusing on policy, funding, and equity. First, I want to underscore the importance of placing these topics at the center of a scientific conference, recognizing that science alone is not enough. I've been given the impossible task of summarizing all of these discussions in under 12 minutes, and the way I'll approach this is by providing an overview of the conference through these three lenses. I'll reference specific sessions, so you can scan the QR codes if you want to explore them further. Be ready because the slides will go by fast, and I'll highlight one standout moment as the belle of the ball for the three themes. So we'll be an hour way. Unsurprisingly, funding dominated many discussions. The mood was sober. The HIV response is at a financial crossroads. From the opening session to the plenary, big money and the big picture, they underscore that a global HIV funding is at a critical juncture. Reductions, especially in PEPFAR USAID, in development assistance and programmatic support are disrupting health systems with HIV, viral hepatitis, and STI services especially affected. Epidemiological needs continue to grow, while international and domestic investment fails to keep pace. Low and middle income countries in particular face a widening funding gap, threatening to deepen inequities and undermine the sustainability of the response. Second, the sessions from Freeze to Forward and Reimagining Prevention underline community-led assessment of these funding cuts and strategies to mitigate their effects, highlighting how fragile commodity supply chains remain, with access being directly tied to financing flows and donor priorities. In this context, reimagining prevention is critical. HIV prevention programs are at risk as decision makers balance competing priorities, despite the long-term cost savings prevention brings to national health systems. The political nature of funding was clear in No Retreat, No Surrender, and Protecting Progress amid the rise of the anti-rights movement. Here, speakers showed how funding is not just about budgets, but also about politics. Anti-rights movements are dismantling programs, silencing community-led work, and shrinking civic space. Funding decisions can strengthen or weaken entire human rights environments. Still, there was good news. Owning and sustaining the response in low and middle income countries highlighted how countries like Brazil, the Philippines, and Kenya are mobilizing domestic financing. Approaches range from integrating HIV into health insurance systems to using social contracting. The lesson is that self-reliance is possible, but not without its challenges. The standout takeaway for finding is that the HIV response is indeed at a financial crossroad. Diversified, sustainable funding through community budgets, through resilient supply chains, through stronger domestic investment is not optional but essential for survival. But if funding was a technical concern of IAS 2025, equity was its moral compass. The session Advancing Equity in the HIV Response focused on key population and human rights, with speakers from Kenya, Uganda, India, and Myanmar emphasizing how that meaningful equity requires decriminalization, legal reform, and investment in community-led programs. Yet, as health equity in challenging times highlighted, equity remains fragile. Structural racism, stigma, and criminalization continue to be powerful drivers of exclusion. Conflict zones were another stark reminder. The double burden session drew examples from Gaza, Ukraine, South Sudan, Mozambique, and the Central African Republic. In this context, HIV incidence and prevalence rise just as health systems collapse, creating double vulnerability. Protecting health workers and displaced populations is an urgent international responsibility. Several sessions pushed us to look beyond biomedical fixes, identifying and intervening on structural determinants of health, highlighted poverty, gender inequality, and climate change as root causes. Similarly, advancing HIV monitoring reframed data equity, showing that communities must lead in monitoring and interpreting data. Otherwise, it's just noise. Perhaps the most powerful voices came from the I Will Not Lower My Voice session, where trans and gender diverse activists from Russia, the US, Vietnam, France, and Kenya spoke of survival in the face of stigma and violence. Their testimony was a clear reminder: equity is not abstract, it is about survival. Innovation brought both promise and risk. Revolutionizing HIV, AI, equity, and the next frontier asked whether AI will reduce disparities or deepen them. The answer depends entirely on governance, transparency, and equitable access. In this regard, the standout takeaway for equity is that it is the thread that ties everything together. Without it, policy and funding lose their meaning, and those most affected are left behind. Policy was everywhere at IAS 2025, and the overall message was that HIV policy is in a transition, moving towards sustainability, integration, and evidence-based adaptation. In this regard, a differentiated service delivery was again front and center. The session Building Forward reinforced that DSD is no longer a pilot innovation, but a core policy tool. By tailoring services to people's needs, DSD helps sustain HIV care even with fewer resources. Countries like South Africa, Malawi, Zambia, and Uganda have already shown how scaling up DSD models can maintain access in challenging environments. Country leadership was also highlighted. Our host country, Rwanda's achievements in leading the way showed what strong political will, accountability, and community partnerships can accomplish. Rwanda has already reached the UNAIDS 95-95-95 targets ahead of schedule, proving that policy commitments can translate into measurable success. Complementing this, the symposium Leadership for Science called for shifting more scientific leadership to low and middle-income countries, ensuring research agendas reflect regional needs, while safeguarding against misinformation and funding constraints. Global frameworks also came under discussion in the WHO session towards the finish line. Participants emphasized the role of science in shaping policy and stressed the need to differentiate between integration, convergence, and layering of services. The point was clear that integration is not a slogan, but it does require strategy. Finally, the session, What's New in WHO Guidelines, launched important updates in prevention, testing, and treatment. This included innovations like the use of long-acting injectable lenacapavir for HIV prevention and updated guidance on breastfeeding, recognizing the right of people on effective ART to consider breastfeeding as a choice. The guidelines support simplification and better use of limited resources to expand access and improve outcomes while focusing on people often left behind. In summary, the HIV policy is evolving as we said towards sustainability and integration. Its true test is not technical efficiency, but whether it reaches and serves the people who need it most. And finally, for the bell of the ball of AIS 2025, it was the conversation around integration as it brings together science, policy, funding, and community perspectives. A set of sessions tackled it directly, but the debate was whether it advances equity or it risks eroding it. Accelerating integration in a new operational environment, pathways to integrate people-centered HIV and primary healthcare, and our integration and equity at odds recognize that integration into primary healthcare is inevitable. Nonetheless, there must be careful consideration of how, when, and where HIV services and enabling multisectorial actions and systems, including human resources for health, supply chains, and financing, are incorporated into PHC approaches to ensure that people living with and vulnerable to HIV are not left behind. If integration is done poorly, it risks diluting focus on key population. The call was to ask communities what integration means to them and design policies that protects equity, not just efficiency. Integration may be inevitable, but not automatically equitable. Done right, it can bring policy, funding, and communities together. Done poorly, it risks diluting focus on key populations. AIS 2025 left us with clear lessons in terms of policy, translate WHO guidelines updates, differentiated service delivery, and PHC integration into practice by embedding community leadership at every stage. In terms of funding, protect and expand community budgets, push for domestic financing, and diversify the funding streams to safeguard progress in the face of donor retrenchment. And in terms of equity, make it non-negotiable. Address the needs of conflict-affected and trans communities, and demand that every policy and every funding decision be assessed against its equity impact. To summarize, the challenge is not the science. The real question is whether political will and funding will rise to the task, and whether equity will lead the way. And with that, I thank you for your attention, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Gaston, for that enlightening presentation. It's now my pleasure to introduce our next presenter, Doreen Moracha, digital content creator and HIV advocate, and the founder of I Am a Beautiful Story in Kenya. Doreen will be sharing her personal insights and a community perspective on IAS 2025. Welcome, Doreen.
Thank you so much, Kenneth, and good afternoon, good evening, good morning to everyone. I have been given 12 minutes, and for community, 12 minutes is very short, but I will try. At IAS 2025, it happened in Africa, on the African soil, and that is part of the things that gave me so much joy. This was not just another conference. Specifically with everything that has happened in the HIV response this year. You've heard it from Gaston, you've heard it from Alexandria. To me, it was a reimagining and recommitment of hope through the data, through the new medicines, through the new research, and through the bold commitments that were made in Kigali. And as someone who has lived with HIV for the last almost 33 years now, born at a time when there were no ARVs, hope is not something that I take lightly. ARVs have kept me alive. Science has kept me alive. That's why every breakthrough at IAS 2025 is personal to me, because when science moves forward, so does our lives. When science stalls, because of stigma, because of funding cuts, because of harmful policies, our lives are in danger. So today I want to share what IAS 2025 taught me, or rather taught us, and what it means for communities like mine, and why we must keep fighting for equity, for funding, for dignity, for new interventions, because the epidemic is not over and neither is our fight, and we cannot stop now. First of all, Africa was at the center. And IAS showed us something very powerful, that Africa is no longer just a statistic. Africa is the center of innovation. We are leading the charge in clinical trials, infrastructure, cure research through the Africa Cure Consortium. And the HIV cure conversation is something I take very personally, because at one time I have stopped taking my ARVs because I believed I was cured. So this is something that is very close to my heart. And this is were made very far away from us. But today, science is coming from here, and the solutions are coming from our own hands. The Africa I want to see in the HIV response is a response that is fast, that is strong, that is funded, that is empowered, that is community-driven and centered, because communities are not just beneficiaries. Communities are partners in science, partners in solutions, and partners in ending the HIV epidemic. We also have a new baby in town that has been presented with the previous presenters. That is the magic word, lenacapavir. Now, let me tell you about this star of the show, which is a twice-yearly injectable for HIV prevention. Data already shows how amazing it is and how well it prevents the HIV epidemic. But it also shows how much it changes life, from the rural areas to the urban areas, how much it gives people privacy, choice, dignity. And the trials, they have shown that it works for adolescent girls and young women, pregnant women, young people, and most of them have also preferred injections over pills. Why? Because daily pills can feel like a daily reminder of HIV. Trust me, I have been on medication for the last 20 years. So Len gives freedom from that. The Global Fund and Gilead have already committed to giving us doses. WHO has given the green light by adding it as part of the treatment guidelines. But let's be honest, this will only work if communities are engaged, if we fight the stigma, if we hold governments accountable, if the funding stays, because without money, lenacapavir will remain a headline and not a lifeline, and we do not want that. We have also seen an expansion of the long-acting choices. Lenacapavir is not alone. That prevention toolbox is growing very much. There is a once monthly pill that is coming. There is Kabele. We have seen how much young girls, especially from Zambia, through the DREAMS program, loved it. And it's because of the discreteness of long-acting treatment options and how much it gives adolescent girls and young women specifically that control, because it's something that we have chosen as communities. And when we choose tools that work for us, it also means that we are choosing health. However, in as much as the long-acting treatments are game changers, these tools will only sit in warehouses if we do not bring in governments, holding them accountable to fund the HIV response, bring in money, fight for it, and bring in communities at the table, because we need that. If we don't do that, we're going to have very many amazing tools that are not going to be working for us because they are seated somewhere in warehouses. I am going to repeat the funding, because funding was a major topic at IAS 2025. Money is the heart of the HIV response. When funding is being cut, as we have seen in 2025, and every time that funding has been cut, the first people to suffer, the first programs to suffer are the community programs. The peer educators, the outreach workers, the safe spaces, the mentor mothers, those things that make science real in people's lives. Without community-led services, people drop out of care, prevention fails, stigma wins. Science alone is not enough. We need science plus community plus funding. Take one away and the response collapses. We've seen that in 2025. We have seen it happening to us. So when we advocate for funding, it's not just for research labs. It's for us, the communities who turn science into solutions. It's for me, it's for you, it's for everyone still vulnerable and at risk of getting HIV. So some of the takeaways from the communities and from me, Doreen Moracha, what does IAS 2025 mean for us? 3 things. First, science gives us power, but only if we have access. And access comes through equity, advocacy, and breaking barriers like stigma. Secondly, stigma kills. Science can't save lives if shame keeps people away from clinics. That's why community-led work matters, because we fight stigma from the ground up. I live publicly with HIV, and I can tell you that the stigma in 2025 is up in the charts. It's very high. Thirdly, money is not just numbers. Money is life. When donors pull out, when governments don't commit, people die. We cannot let that happen. Not after all the progress that we've made. Not when the end is in sight, because we are doing well, except we need the money. As I close, IAS 2025 left me inspired, but it also reminded me that the fight for against the HIV epidemic is far from over. We have amazing science, we have amazing data, we have amazing research, we have amazing leadership. We have hope, but none of that will matter if we don't keep pushing for equity, for funding, and for dignity, and to end HIV-related stigma. As someone living with HIV, I sit here today as proof that science works. Science has saved my life. Science has kept me alive for almost 33 years now. But I also stand here as a reminder that progress is fragile. We must make science personal. We must make the advocacy relentless, and we must keep the hope alive, not just for us, but for every child, every woman, every adolescent girl and boy, and every man who deserves a life free of HIV. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doreen, for your beautiful story. And we now invite everyone to the Q&A session, and also invite the previous speakers to also join the Q&A session. You can bring your cameras back. And I also want to remind the other attendees that if you have any question, please shoot it to the Q&A box, not at the bottom of your screen, not the chat box, so that then the questions can be seen. And in this session, I'll work very closely with Susan, who will probably start taking the first questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Kenneth, for the opportunity. I think this first question is directed to Alexandra. What plans are there to reverse the harms from Trump's cuts to PEPFAR and scientific progress? And not just Alexandra, I think any of the speakers. Are there any plans to reverse the harms from Trump's cuts to PEPFAR and scientific progress?
I'm not sure if I'm the best person to answer, but I may try, and I'm sure the co-presenter will have plenty of ideas. What I have seen in the conference, and I think, Doreen, you said it very beautifully, that Kigali is that kind of conference that left everyone very moved, and there was a lot of hope. It was not the conference of we will not do it. It was a conference that we will not go back. And innovation occurring in clinical trial in Africa, in many countries, resource-limited countries or rich countries, show that innovation may drive progress, and we will not go back. So I have the hope that, of course, we will not replace PEPFAR like this, but there are many other progresses that have been announced during the IAS conferences, the IAS conference. For example, the agreement with the Global Fund and Gilead with regards to lenacapavir Second, the agreement with the medicine patent pool, allowing access to long-acting injectable treatments. So I think we have seen we have seen Gates Foundation, we have seen other foundation, we have seen the countries, and we have seen many people trying to bridge the gap. But of course, I don't think there will be only one funders that will replace PEPFAR with like this. But I'm happy to hear for Gaston or Doreen to complement what I just said.
Sure. What I can bring on my end is that the question poses a two-way answer. The first is like the short-term answer. There is certainly a big movement of stakeholders, both from the US and from the rest of the world, that are pressuring the US government, being from state or not state parties, particularly a lawsuit by AVAC to the Department of State, pressuring for the release of the funds that have been cut, that not only affect the service delivery of medicines that ultimately save people's lives, but also that have costed the jobs of thousands of health workers as well. But also like the long-term answer would be to what it is that we are learning from this. Because there was this quote by Mitchell Warren, executive director of AVAC, that he said it the first day, so it got like repeated throughout the whole conference, that when you have a house and an earthquake brings it down, you do not build back the same house. You have to build it with stronger foundations, and there's certainly a lesson to learn in terms of how funding should not come from one single donor, because everything is exposed to the change in political wind, and the whole HIV response cannot be based on that. So there's certainly a lesson to be learned on diversifying funds. And by my presentation, please do not think that I do not believe that international cooperation should be a thing. It certainly needs to be reinstated, but we also need to address country ownership and different forms of sustainability that digress from these different forms of neocolonialism that we are facing in the HIV response. We certainly need to save the HIV response, but make it stronger. Over.
Do you have any additions, Doreen, or we move on to the REN question?
I feel like what I wanted to say has been said. So let's
Thank
just
you.
go to the next.
Thank you very much. And not surprising, we have several questions on REN, and those I'll shoot directly to Dr. Alexandra Kame. And these questions are around REN dosing and availability. So probably we could address that issue. There are several questions on dosing, on availability, and approve. I think that those are the kind of questions that I'm lumping together.
I'm just saying, what drug are you talking about?
Lenacapavir
okay.
for prevention, because
Yeah,
you
okay.
presented on it, and the questions around the dosing of lenacapavir.
Yeah, so today the dosing is twice yearly. It's administered subcutaneously. But what I think is interesting is that there were at CROI this year in 2025 some very interesting data, pharmacokinetic data, suggesting that we could provide lenacapavir for even 1 year. So I think, or I kind of think that maybe in the 2-3 coming years, maybe it will not be lenacapavir twice yearly dosing, but maybe once yearly dosing. So it's all interesting with lenacapavir, but we have to say that this is all the results of the Purpose 1 and the Purpose 2 study. So it's difficult right now to have a huge experience in implementing this drug and to decentralize the drug. So how are the program going to adapt for 23,000 people going to ask lenacapavir in centralized areas? So I think there is still a lot to learn on how to implement the lenacapavir in countries.
Thank you. And this is another question to you and anybody else in the panel. And this is related to the barriers of implementing lenacapavir PrEP in low resource settings or resource limited settings.
Let me just highlight a little bit about the barriers, especially in low resource settings. And I'm going to take it from the African perspective, where HIV is heavily funded by donors and we don't own our own HIV response. That way, when we finally get LEN, again, it is going to be funded, which means we don't have the agency. And that is a very huge barrier, because we will have it for a while, and then what happens next? Also, the prioritization. Who gets the priorities of the first doses that are going to come? Kenya has announced, like, from 2026, we'll have them. So the prioritization, how do we prioritize the people who access it first? Who goes first without causing an imbalance and chaos? And also, my last point would be this word has gone, how we keep LEN for a long time. What is the English word of that? Oh my God, my English bundles are going. Sustainability. That is the word. Yes. How we keep LEN sustainable, especially in low resource settings, because we now have it's buzzing, everything is like, we're all excited, but when we finally have LEN and people are accessing it, how do we keep LEN for a long time? Because at the end of the day, governments have not fully committed. We have not seen the commitment of many governments that they're going to buy LEN, they're going to keep it sustainable for everyone. And those are the kind of things that worry me, because it's not about access, it's about availability.
Thank you. Any other person before we move on to Susan to take the next question?
I think that from our side here in Latin America and the Caribbean, considering how many of our countries have been left out of the voluntary licensing agreement, will be, I mean, the short-term easier solution will be for more countries and generic manufacturers to be included in licensings via multilateral agreements through MPP or other similar mechanisms that are available. And of course, if this sort of changes are not applied, I mean, countries in the end may opt for compulsory licensing measures in order to amplify access, as Doreen was saying, because it's an issue of availability. But thinking beyond that, I think that there's something that needs to be said around structurally in how it is that we are accessing medicines overall, because yesterday it was dolutegravir, today it's lenacapavir, and tomorrow it may be a different thing. Hopefully a vaccine, hopefully a cure, and everything will go through the same thing. And when we do research, we always try to think about a global intervention, or in terms of where you are geographically, or who you are biologically. So I mean, and none of this can happen if you don't include community on every step of the way. But for us who have been part of countries that have been part of the studies that make these sort of interventions happen, it's also like a double that as a HIV response we have. Over.
Maybe if I may, Kenneth, if you allow me. One thing that I think is important, very important when we talk about lenacapavir, it is not a vaccine. I have seen so many journalists asking me about this new vaccine, and I was like, oh, what vaccine are they talking about? Maybe the phase 1, or they know the one that will save the world. And I said, well, unfortunately, it is not a vaccine, so it works very well, but I think we should not say or let the vaccine feel behind, because the difference between a vaccine, there are many differences between vaccine and lenacapavir, but one difference is about equity and the fact that with a vaccine, you have a broad population, you reach diverse population, whereas with PrEP and even with lenacapavir, even although it is very efficient, you only reach the one who go and get the drug every 6 months at the place you indicate to them. And in terms of cost, in terms of resistance, etc., I think we still have a lot to gain from having a vaccine. So one should not oppose vaccine and lenacapavir. That was just my point today. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you so much. The next question is very long. There's a question from Yaris. Yaris said, can you share insights on the current state of data collection and analysis, specifically focusing on transgender men and HIV? I've noticed that research often prioritizes transgender women, leaving a gap in understanding the unique needs and challenges of trans men. Are there specific funding opportunities available to support HIV prevention and treatment efforts tailored to trans men community? Additionally, how can we address the marginalization of trans men in HIV research and programming, considering that most funding seems to target trans women and gay men / MSM, given the higher risk of HIV contraction among trans men? What strategies can be implemented to better support this community?
Would you like me to go first?
Yeah.
First, thanks, Jais, for your question. I think that it's a very important topic that's very worth mentioning in a space like this, the representation of trans men in every single aspect of the response. I think that the biggest challenge that we have in terms of trans and gender diverse people, by particularly trans men, is the lack of disaggregated data, as you said. And I think this is something that applies in many aspects and for many populations in which you only have data reported in terms of gender, in however shape or form the reporting mechanism decides to frame that. So that's the biggest issue, in my opinion, is that we do not have a clear indication of how to proceed with something that is not being measured. In terms of how it is that we can address that, the first is to recognize that trans men are exposed are exposed to HIV, and that they have sexual practices that are very diverse, because the most often conception is that trans men are not exposed to HIV. And there are actually studies that are starting to include trans men in their studies to counter this fact. I think Alexandra mentioned Merck's MK8527 study as a phase 2, and apparently the phase 3 study will be considering trans men within their inclusion criteria. Over.
Is there anyone else to answer this, or we move on to the next question?
I agree with Gaston. I have nothing to add, really. I think it's always very important to disaggregate the data. So this is a very good point.
Thank you so much. The next question from Audifoso is in French. Okay, someone needs to read this.
Well, the question that she asked is about what is the name of the drugs that were so much successful in terms of rapid reduction of viral load. I'm not sure it's really relevant to talk about which company has done which drug, because today more than 90% of the people living with HIV in the world are receiving the same combination. And I think this is so much of a great success that the TLD, so dolutegravir, lamivudine, and tenofovir disoproxil fumarate is really the combination that has the greatest success. I don't even know how many generic manufacturers are doing this drug, because there are many, but I think maybe the only thing I could say that it is a success that more than 90% of people, not only people like adults, but adolescents, children, infants, are receiving the same kind of combination based on the dolutegravir. So I think this is probably the biggest success, if I may answer like this.
Thanks so much for taking that, Alexandra. Felipe is asking, how soon will these new therapies be made available to most African countries? And are there no risks associated with dropping the daily pills to monthly pills or injections?
Do you want me to start or?
Yeah, I think they're asking about lenacapavir, so you can start.
Yeah, well, the injectable PrEP is not only lenacapavir, by the way, it's also cabotegravir. So it's important maybe to note that we don't put all the eggs in the same basket, if I may say like this. I don't know if we can say that in English, we say that in French. I think what I just said is that during the conference, it was announced that there was for lenacapavir an agreement with Gilead and the Global Fund, and that has been negotiated with several countries, around 20 countries that were at high prevalence countries, where I think the countries as well will put some amount of money that hasn't been disclosed. So I don't know the amount of money that was negotiated with each country, the Global Fund and Gilead. But I think it's where I completely concur with what Gaston said. It's now the time for the countries to negotiate what they want in terms of access for the injectable PrEP. But that said, the second part of the question is also very important. We do have a low-cost PrEP that works if we take it. So we should not take away the oral daily PrEP or the on-demand PrEP or maybe the once monthly PrEP that is going to be developed right now and entering the phase 3 trials. Because I think what is really important that everyone can pick whatever suits him or her. And I think this is very important. So clearly there is space for more than one injectable drugs today in the PrEP arena. I think, Yanis, you answered to what I just said, that there will be 9 countries early adopters for lenacapavir in Africa. So I don't know if you want to say more than to everyone. And I think there is also some link in the chat about how to find this information.
Thank you. I think these are great questions. There's also another question on long-acting ARVs for treatment. And the question is, what are the plans on the ground? I know you presented some of that information, Alexander, so you probably could share a bit more on that.
Yeah, I can't find the question that you're talking about.
It's what are the plans on the ground for long-acting ARVs for treatment? And there are 2 questions on the same. Then there's the other question is from Onesmo. Onismo is, are there any plans to produce long-acting ARVs? Can you see those questions?
Yeah. Plans to produce long-acting ARVs, or many people around in this room would know better than me, but I think there are clearly plans to produce long-acting ARVs from generic manufacturers, and both for cabotegravir and rilpivirine and for lenacapavir, it was announced during the IAS conference. That said, it takes time. Like, it's not because you announce that you get the patent rights and you can produce a drug that you will get the drug. It takes time. So I don't think it's because we have the right to produce it that we'll have the drugs by the end of the year. That's not how it is. And about the costs, the Gilead and Global Fund costs or price negotiated price, if I may say, haven't been disclosed, or at least I don't know. I'm not in this negotiation, so I don't know the price that were negotiated. What I know is that the countries will have also to put some money if they want to get access to this deal together with Global Fund and Gilead. So I cannot really precisely answer this question. I'm really sorry.
Thank you. Any additions?
Perhaps something that is to be said, not to go on a tangent, but thinking beyond lenacapavir, is that from not only HIV, but thinking about hepatitis C and COVID, I think that the system has repeatedly failed in terms of guaranteeing access and biomedical advancements in countries that are low to middle income and key populations. Also considering how many of the basic research for the development of these medications have been having made by public institutions, are being financed by the taxpayers' money. Lenacapavir is not the exception. Even when the studies are funded completely by the private sector, they are being conducted in populations that, according to ethical guidelines, should benefit from their results. So I think that a key takeaway from this is that we should never lose track of these products being recognized as global public goods, and we need policies that guarantee an equitable access in the moment of the technology transfer from the private sector to public sector. We know that there are many manufacturers that are producing lenacapavir around the world, them being generic manufacturers, but also we need to allow for regional manufacturing. We're thinking about Sub-Saharan Africa. None of the manufacturers that are producing LN, at least according to what I last remember, are located in Sub-Saharan Africa. And again, many of the countries that have taken part of the studies are not being included in the agreement. So we definitely need to work jointly to make sure that even if it's not it's not going to be, because we think about lenacapavir, we think about the cure, we think about the vaccine as this life-saving thing that will like completely shift things, and we will wake up the following day with the grass being greener. Even if it's not something that will solve everyone's problem, it is something that it's worth being at the access of everyone that needs it. As Alexandra said, we need the option to be an actual option for people who need it most. Over.
Thank you so much, Gaston. Thank you so much. There's something the community would like to know, and I'm directing this to Doreen. Emmanuel said, I became HIV positive in late 2021. I take ARVs every night. Sometimes I wish there was a long-acting ARV, and I am asking if some will be available soon. I think it was part of your presentation, and also you can motivate with your story, Doreen.
Yeah. So we do have injectable ARVs in the global north, except because most countries from the global south cannot be able to afford the cost. We are still waiting on the generics, and as Alexandra said, even though the patents are available, it takes time. So research takes time. Getting the correct measurements and stuff like that also takes time. So there's something I usually say, that the H in HIV does not just mean human, it also means hope. Because over the 4 decades that we have HIV, so many things have changed, that now we are moving into long-acting treatments, and there are people who've been on medication for 20 years, 30 years. So treatment fatigue is real, and I will acknowledge that. But also, there are people, researchers and scientists working behind the scenes to get us the long actings. So we cannot just give up because of the treatment fatigue, because also there are advantages towards taking medication, such as being undetectable. When you are undetectable, you cannot pass on HIV to your partner. And that, I believe, is one of the most beautiful things that has come out of the science that rotates around HIV. So just the confidence of knowing that even as I take my daily treatment, I am suppressing the HIV virus, and that alone just boosts you somehow. So as a person who's been on treatment for 20 years, I get what you're saying. I hear you loud and clear, but I also want you to hold on to the hope that we are definitely going to get injectable ARVs. I don't know when, I don't have a timeline for that, but we are going to get injectable ARVs because they are in existence. It's not that we are speaking about things that are not in existence, they are in existence. So just continue taking one pill a day, suppressing your viral load one day at a time. And then soon enough, I think we're going to have something to work for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doreen. I think there is another question on how can countries navigate to access more funds to support community outreach in order to reach out to undeserved and security compromised rural communities. I think any of the speakers can answer this.
Susan, can you please repeat the question since I can...
Okay, she said, how can countries like ours navigate to access more funds to support community outreach in order to reach undeserved and security compromised rural areas?
I think that to begin answering that question, what we can say is that you are not alone. I think that everyone in this webinar today is experiencing the same thing, for better or for worse, because that also means that there's certainly more competition towards the same old funding resources that are still in place. But something that, at least from our end, we're trying to do is to be creative, to be innovative, and we won't reach different objectives by doing the same. That's I think the core of what I was trying to say with diversifying funding is trying to see where in the intersectionality of HIV we can find resources to make sure that the people that we have been servicing all along can continue trusting us, because if there's something that the HIV response throughout these 4 years has made it has accomplished in bringing back trust to this life-saving medicine that Doreen was speaking about.
And I can add that maybe it's also time for us for country advocates to have honest conversations with our countries, because I don't know whether I've hanged. Anyway, I think it's also time for us to have honest conversations with our countries, and also put them on the spotlight, hold them accountable, because again, if countries do not take charge of the HIV response, it definitely means that it's going to fall apart. When it falls apart, now countries are moving into the integration part, which means they are hoping to reach everyone, including people in rural areas. But there is also HIV-related stigma. As we are talking integration, some of the people in rural areas come from close-knit communities. You walk into a facility, your cousin works there, you are afraid that your cousin is going to go and tell everyone you have HIV, so you stop going for treatment. That means we have lost someone in care. So maybe it's also time that as countries are now talking integration, we now hold them accountable, that what are we going to do in terms of some of the foreseen challenges that we do expect to see, and how do we not leave anyone behind. And that also means funding peer educators, mentor mothers, ensuring that they are actually paid and on a payroll, so that they are able to do the job and reach everyone no matter where they are in the community.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Kenneth, you can go ahead.
Thank you, Susan. There's another question on MK8527. And this is directed to Alexandra. And this on what are your thoughts on MK8527, Madre Oral Prep, as it's moving into phase 3 now?
Yeah, I would like to, Kenneth, I would like to ask you what you think, because you are such an expert in that. I think from my side, I think it's very exciting. It means that in a year you will have 12 pills and you would cover PrEP for a year. So how acceptable it is, how feasible it is to take this, I would like to ask you, Kenneth. So.
Thank you. Now, the roles change a bit. Just to quickly say, because I'm also a prevention advocate and a scientist, is that this is an exciting product because it's a monthly pill, and we know not everybody can accept an injection. Just like in the field of contraception, where you have multiple methods, we anticipate that this will be, once it's found to be safe and efficacious, it's going to be an additional tool in the HIV prevention toolbox. So let's stay tuned and advocate for more methods so that it's not one size fits all when it comes to HIV prevention, neither when it comes to HIV treatment.
Yeah, and also maybe just to say it's a NRTTI, a translocation inhibitor. It's the same family as the famous islatravir. You remember the one that lowers the total lymphocyte count, that for which we had really to reduce the dosage in the most recent clinical trial. And there was one question in the chat. I may just answer that yes, there is islatravir long-acting that has been presented also at IAS, but it's a long-acting on once weekly. So you can see that there's so much in this pipeline, the once weekly with islatravir for treatment, the once monthly for PrEP, and the every 2 months for the cabotegravir rilpivirine in treatment or in PrEP for the cabotegravir, and every 6 months for the lenacapavir. There is so much thing in our plate that indeed, what I totally agree with you, Kenneth, we should have everything for everyone, and the choice will be key.
Thank you, Alexandra. So we can look, any other question you want to shoot, Susan?
Gaston,
do you mind me chiming in on this
yes.
topic before we move on? I think that the monthly oral alternative will also put a case for the demedicalization side of things, because even though we appreciate the advantages of long-acting injectables, we also recognize that they do require treatment and implementation within like health facilities by healthcare professionals. While we had come up all this way with oral PrEP delivery and differentiated delivery, taking it outside of the hospital and into pickup centers, community-led organizations, and that is something that again that has to be sustained in a way, and in terms of favoring people and finding people where they are instead of waiting for them to come and see us where we are. And also in terms of practicity, and thinking about implementation in low and middle income settings, injectables also have this potential to convey people with more opportunities to find bureaucracy, to find a stigma, because you may be able to get the injectable in one pharmacy, but they won't apply it in that one, and then you have to go find another pharmacy in which you will maybe ask, why are you taking this medication, and find as an expression of stigma. So having the practicity to take one, hopefully more monthly pill, whether it's PrEP, whether it's ARV for people living with HIV, in terms of conveniency, it's definitely an asset to look up for. Over.
Thank you. I know we are coming towards the end of our time, and I will start by thanking all the speakers and the participants for staying on. We currently have over 400 participants listening in, and we have taken very good messages from all the speakers. I think just to quickly highlight from Alexandra, thank you for doing a great recap on the BNAPs for both cure and prevention. You've reminded us on the findings from lenacapavir and the safety and efficacy that was maintained in the on the lenacapavir among adolescents. You have talked about the WHO guidelines for REN and updated guidelines on treatment, and then the safety and pharmacokinetics of MK8527 that was demonstrated in phase 2, and the impact of the budget cuts. And then for Gaston, you talked about many good things, including on policy, funding, and equity, and how Rwanda has been able to achieve 95, 95, 95 ahead of its time, which is very reassuring for many countries that it can also be done by other countries. And you reminded us that integration is not a slogan, but requires strategy. And if integration is done poorly, it can end up removing or diluting focus on key populations. Among other things, you also highlighted the WHO guidelines on DSD that were launched in the IAS 2025 and PHC integration guidelines. For Maureen, again, yours is truly a beautiful story. You have reminded us that it's science that has kept you and millions of others alive, and that is important, and that funding will move REN from headline to lifeline. I liked that quote. Your talk had a lot of nice quotes, and that money and funding is at the heart of the HIV response, and that we need science, community, and funding coming together if we have to impact the HIV response. You have said very many great things, but there are many more great things on the conference website. Currently, the conference content will be available to the public on the 19th of September. That's about in 2 weeks, but it's already available for the IAS members. So all those nice things that our presenters have talked about, you can get all the details in the conference website. So thank you very much. I'll now pass over to my eloquent Susan Shuba.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, our wonderful IAS family. I would like to let you know that you'll be requested to fill out an evaluation survey as you leave the webinar. The feedback is important so that the IAS Educational Fund can continue improving its webinars for the future. The link to the survey will also be shared in the chat box. Again, would like to thank you as this webinar is coming to an end. You are going to get the recording of this webinar from the IAS Plus platform soon. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day. Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much to the organizers and to the great leaders, Kenneth and Susan. You were wonderful. Thank you.
It was our pleasure.